A man kneels on the floor of his own home. His hands are shaking. He doesn't remember the last few minutes of his life, only that when his sight came back, his family was gone. You know this man. Disney gave him a song, a training montage, and a happy ending on Mount Olympus. The Greeks who invented him gave him none of that. They gave him a curse, a slaughter, and a debt he would spend the rest of his life trying and failing to pay off. This is the version of Hercules Disney could never film. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the 12 labors were never a heroic quest at all. To understand how we got to that floor, we have to go back to before he was even born, because Hera's hatred didn't start with the madness. It started at the moment of his conception. Disney says Hercules is Hera's son, exiled from Olympus by accident. That's the first lie. He was never hers, and that single fact explains everything that happens to him. Zeus wanted this child badly enough to disguise himself as a mortal king, Amphitryon, and come to that king's own wife, Alcmene, wearing her husband's face. The myths say that single night lasted 3 times as long as any other. The sun itself held back, so the conception could take hold. Hera didn't need proof. She looked at the child and knew exactly whose betrayal he represented, so she tried to kill him before he could walk. 2 serpents, sent into his nursery to strangle him in his sleep. Any other infant would not have survived it. He did. The myths say he strangled both snakes with his bare hands before he could even speak. That was the first time his strength saved him. It would not be the last time it also terrified everyone around him, including, eventually, himself. Even his name carries the wound. He wasn't born Hercules. He was born Alcides. He only became Heracles, literally, the glory of Hera later, as a kind of offering, an attempt to buy peace with a goddess who was never going to grant it. It didn't work. It was never going to. Before the labors the myths are famous for, Hercules had already built a life, and it was not an easy one. As a young man, he was sent away for his education, like any noble son. But even his schooling ended in tragedy. During a music lesson, his teacher Linus corrected him too harshly, and Hercules, in a moment of temper, struck him with his own lyre, hard enough to kill him. He was acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, but it was an early, unsettling preview of what his strength could do when his control slipped, even for a second. Years later, Thebes came under threat from a rival city, the minions of Autumnus, demanding a brutal yearly tribute. Hercules led the Thebans to a decisive victory, and in gratitude, the king of Thebes gave him the greatest reward he could offer, his own daughter Megara in marriage. For a while, it was enough. Hercules and Megara had children together, in most versions of the myth 3 sons. He had a home, a wife who loved him, a family that, for the first time in his strange and violent life, gave him something to protect rather than something to fight. It doesn't last. It was never going to. Hera had waited years, and now, with everything Hercules loved gathered under one roof, she finally made her move. Hera did not simply curse Hercules with anger. She sent something far more precise. Lyssa, the spirit of rage and frenzy itself, to tear through his mind and leave nothing of his judgment behind. In his madness, Hercules could no longer recognize his own home. His sons became, in his eyes, the children of his enemies. His wife became a threat to be neutralized. The myths describe a man utterly convinced he was defending himself, when in truth he was destroying the only people who had never given him a reason to fight. When the frenzy finally lifted, and his vision cleared, Hercules found his home in ruins, and Megara and his children dead by his own hand. There is no version of this story where Disney's hero exists. This is a man who, for a handful of cursed minutes, became the very thing he had spent his whole life fighting. The grief that followed was, by some accounts, almost as dangerous as the madness itself. Hercules is said to have considered ending his own life. It was his cousin, the hero Theseus, who found him and refused to let him. Guilt, Theseus told him, was not something you erase by dying. It was something you carried. And if you were strong enough to survive monsters, you were strong enough to survive yourself. That idea, survival as its own kind of penance, is the thread that runs through everything that follows. Grief-stricken and desperate for a way to cleanse the blood from his hands, Hercules traveled to Delphi to consult the oracle. The only voice in the Greek world believed to speak directly for the gods. Her answer was not comfort, it was a sentence. She confirmed what his name had always half promised, that he was to serve Hera, literally, in service to her chosen king. He was ordered to travel to Tiryns and place himself under the command of King Eurystheus, a ruler he privately despised, a man far beneath him in courage and strength, for a period the myths usually give as 10 years, sometimes 12. Whatever tasks the king demanded, no matter how humiliating or impossible, Hercules would perform them without argument. This is the true origin of the 12 labors, not a quest chosen for glory, a punishment assigned by an oracle, to atone for a crime he never chose to commit. Take the very first labor, the Nemean lion. In the film, it's an adventure. In the myth, it plays almost like an execution order, a beast whose hide no blade, no arrow, no weapon forged by mortal hands could pierce, sent to a man who was, in every real sense, already being punished. Hercules had no choice but to fight it with his bare hands, choking the life out of it in its own cave. He later skinned it and wore the impenetrable hide as armor, not a trophy of triumph, a permanent reminder, worn against his own skin, of exactly what those hands were capable of. The second labor was worse. The Hydra, a serpent with many heads, one of them immortal, and for every head Hercules severed, 2 more grew back in its place. He only survived by having his nephew cauterize each wound the instant a head fell, stopping the regrowth before it could begin. Eurystheus later tried to disqualify the labor entirely, claiming Hercules had cheated by accepting that help. Even his victories, even the moments that should have counted as redemption, were met with contempt from the very king he'd been sentenced to obey. By the final labors, the tasks stopped being about monsters altogether. Eurystheus sent him to steal golden apples guarded by nymphs at the edge of the known world, and finally into the underworld itself, to drag Cerberus, the 3-headed hound guarding the dead, back to the surface alive, using nothing but his bare hands. 10 labors, according to the oracle, should have been enough. Eurystheus disqualified 2 on technicalities and demanded 12. Each one chips away at something in him, not glory accumulating, penance being paid, one impossible task at a time, at the discretion of a king who never once forgave him. There are 12 of these labors in total, and each one carries its own strange, brutal story. A king so filthy his stables hadn't been cleared in 30 years, man-eating horses, birds with bronze beaks sharp enough to pierce armor. There's enough in each single labor to fill its own video. And if you want, that's exactly what we'll do next. For now, what matters is the pattern. Every labor Hercules completed wasn't a step toward glory. It was a debt being paid down, one monster at a time, to a goddess who was never going to consider it settled. Disney ends its film with Hercules ascending to Olympus, welcomed home as a hero. The Greeks gave him no such ending, not without cost. Years after the labors were finally complete, Hercules remarried, this time to a woman named Deianira. On their travels together, they came to a river guarded by a centaur named Nessus, who offered to carry Deianira across on his back. Partway through the crossing, Nessus tried to assault her. Hercules, watching from the far bank, shot him with an arrow tipped in the venomous blood of the Hydra he had killed years before. As he lay dying, Nessus told Deianira one final lie, dressed as a gift. If she ever feared losing her husband's love, she should collect his blood, and one day soak it into a garment for Hercules to wear. It would work, he told her, like a charm to bind his devotion forever. It was poison. The same venom that had killed the centaur was still lethal, carried in his blood. Waiting. Years later, hearing a rumor that Hercules' attention had wandered to another woman, Deianira remembered the centaur's promise. Believing she was securing her husband's heart, she soaked a fine tunic in the tainted blood and sent it to him as a gift. The moment Hercules put it on, the poison began to burn through his skin. It fused to him. No amount of pulling could remove it without tearing his own flesh away with it. The pain, the myths insist, was unbearable and unending. Worse, some say, than anything the 12 labors had put him through. There was no antidote, no cure. So Hercules made the only choice left to him. He had a funeral pyre built on a mountaintop, climbed onto it himself, and asked to be burned alive, rather than endure the agony any longer. When Deianira learned what her gift had actually done, she took her own life rather than live with it. Only then, consumed by fire, already dying by his own request, did the myth say Zeus finally brought him up to Olympus, granting him a place among the gods, not as a triumphant hero returning home, as a man who had simply run out of ways to suffer. And yet, this is the figure the ancient world chose to worship. Not a spotless hero, but a man who murdered his own family in a fit of madness, who spent over a decade paying for it, and who died in agony because of a lie he never saw coming. Temples to Hercules spread across Greece and later across the Roman Empire. Kings and emperors claimed descent from him. Soldiers invoked his name before battle. Maybe that's exactly why he endured for 3,000 years. Not because he was perfect, but because he wasn't. He is proof. In the oldest stories, the Greeks told themselves that even the worst thing you've ever done doesn't have to be the last thing you ever are. That there is a version of redemption that isn't clean, isn't easy, and doesn't erase the debt. It just makes you carry it, labor after labor, until it's paid. So which Hercules is the real one? The golden boy Disney gave us, welcomed home without a scratch, or the man cursed into destroying everything he loved, who spent the rest of his life and ultimately his death paying for it? We only scratched the surface of the 12 labors today. There's a lot more buried in each one. Want to know more about Hercules? Let me know in the comments, and I'll bring you a full video on the 12 labors of Hercules, every monster, every trial, in detail.